Economic crises, there's so much more than just scary headlines and plunging stock charts. They're really stress tests, right? They test our financial systems, our communities, and, well, they even test our own character. They have a way of showing us who we really are when the pressure's on. Okay, let's dive into this.
It's the big question, isn't it? What happens when the money runs out? It's a question that just echoes through history, whether we're talking about a single corporate giant collapsing or an entire nation in despair. So in this explainer, we're going to look at what happens when that floor just gives way and what these moments can really teach us about ourselves.
And we're going to tackle this from two totally different angles. On one side, you've got the calculated, almost surgical deception of the Enron scandal, a crisis that was basically born from pure corporate greed. And on the other side, you have the massive, sweeping system failure of the Great Depression, a crisis that brought a whole nation to its knees.
So how does a system actually break? That moment of collapse, it doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it's this huge, sudden shockwave that nobody saw coming. And other times, it's a slow, quiet decay that happens right under our noses for years. For millions of people in 1929, the Great Depression felt exactly like a sudden, violent storm. I mean, one minute everything's fine, the city's humming along, and the next, just like this quote says, the bottom simply dropped out. It was complete, system-wide chaos. But Enron? That was the complete opposite. It wasn't a sudden storm. It was this slow, carefully built lie. It was a corporate house of cards built on years and years of fraud, just waiting for one little gust of wind to knock it all down. Okay, so to really understand the human impact of all this, we first have to get the mechanics, How do these disasters actually happen? Let's pop the hood and take a look. Enron's collapse was basically built on weaponized accounting. One of their favorite tricks was something called hypothetical future value. Now just imagine this. You sign a 20-year business deal, and on day one, you book all 20 years of potential totally unearned profit. That's what they did. They built an entire empire on profits from deals that hadn't even happened yet, and a lot of them never would. And this quote just illustrates the delusion perfectly. A student in a study about the scandal compared the whole thing to the emperor's new clothes. The Enron execs, their accountants, the Wall Street analysts, they were all the swindlers, convincing everybody to stand around and admire these incredible profits that just weren't there. But behind all the complex fraud and the crashing stock tickers, there are real people, and the human cost of these events is just staggering. When that Enron house of cards finally came crashing down, 20,000 people lost their jobs. Just like that. Their savings, their pensions, their entire futures. All of it? Gone. Wiped out by the lies of a few people at the very top. During the Great Depression, that pain was felt on a whole other level. This quote just captures the profound shame so many people felt. It's about a father, a cab driver, who comes home after a long day of work with a single quarter for milk. And he just breaks down. For him, the inability to provide for his family wasn't just a financial problem. It felt like a deep personal failure. And that feeling, that was shared by millions. At its absolute peak, unemployment hit 25%. Think about that for a second. 1 in every 4 workers in the country was jobless. It's a number so huge, it's hard to even wrap your head around, but it represents millions and millions of individual stories of struggle and shame. And what's just so devastating is the psychological toll. I mean, despite this massive, obvious systemic economic failure, the first reflex for so many people was to blame themselves. They took this huge crisis and internalized it as their own personal moral failing, which of course made it almost impossible to see what had actually gone wrong. And that leads us to something a lot deeper, a crisis that wasn't just about economics, but about character and about ethics. This is where you see the stark, incredible contrast in ethical dilemmas. At the top, you've got Enron executives committing massive fraud for unimaginable wealth. And at the bottom, during the Depression, you have ordinary people who are forced to steal, just to feed their families. The moral math they're doing is happening in 2 completely different universes. So this brings up a huge question. Can we actually learn from these kinds of ethical meltdowns? Well, one study tried to figure that out. They took the Enron documentary and showed it to a bunch of business students to see if it would change how they thought about ethics. The results were, well, probably not what you'd expect. Take a look here. The students who watched the Enron film were actually more likely to agree with the statement, the only moral of business is making money. And at the same time, they were less likely to believe that just following the law is good enough to be moral. So instead of making them more idealistic, showing them the scandal seems to have just made them more cynical. This study actually gave this mindset a name, amoral values. It's this belief that business decisions exist in a completely separate universe from ethics. It's the logic that lets someone say, hey, laying off 1,000 people isn't a moral choice, it's a strategic one. It's the classic line, right? It's not personal, it's just business. And as one of the students in that study put it, this was the absolute core failure at Enron. The drive to win, the will to succeed and make money, it just bulldozed everything else. Values like wealth and fame completely took over values like honesty and responsibility. Okay, so after digging through all this wreckage, what can we take away? What do we actually learn by looking at these crises? Well, it seems like 4 big lessons really stand out. First, we need to fireproof our financial systems with smart, robust regulations. Second, as that Enron study showed, you can't act ethically if you don't even see that you're in an ethical situation to begin with. Third, as Ernest Hemingway wrote during the Depression, crisis teaches us that a man alone doesn't have a chance. We're all in this together. And finally, that connection, that sense of community and cooperation becomes our most important tool for survival. And at the end of the day, trying to make money by sacrificing your ethics, it's just a losing game. As another student wisely pointed out, the second the truth about Enron came out, the stock was worthless. The whole scheme was totally unsustainable. Honesty isn't just a moral high ground, it's actually practical. And all of this leaves us with one last really big question. We've definitely gotten better at building financial firewalls to regulate the markets. But have we gotten any better at regulating ourselves? At confronting the greed and the self-deception that light the match in the first place?